You've seen Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, but chances are you never questioned one of its strangest inconsistencies. An Autobot who appears out of nowhere, absent from the new team's big reveal, nowhere to be seen in their secret base, and yet suddenly, there he is, driving alongside them as if he's always been part of the team. His name is Jolt. He's mentioned once, seen only briefly, and then without warning, he performs the most important act in the entire film, using his electro whips to graft Jetfire's parts onto Optimus Prime, giving him the upgrade he needs to shut down the Star Harvester, put Megatron out of commission, and end the Fallen's reign of terror once and for all. And yet, for a character so essential to the climax, Jolt's presence definitely feels like an afterthought. He enters the movie without warning, delivers the winning play, and then vanishes without a trace, never to be seen again in any of the subsequent sequels. So how did this happen? How does a Transformer go from total obscurity to Battlefield MVP? Well, to answer that, we have to look beyond the screen, into rush deadlines, marketing obligations, and a film caught in the middle of a writer's strike. This is the story of Jolt, the Autobot with no origin.
Jolt! Electrify! Transmit those afterburners!
Alright, so the popular theory among fans is that Jolt's sudden appearance in the film was the result of him being added at the last minute during filming. On the surface, it's a theory that makes a lot of sense. It would explain why he's missing from the scenes where Optimus introduces all the new Autobots, and why he's nowhere to be seen at NES headquarters when Optimus speaks with director Galloway. However, surprisingly, that theory isn't actually true. Jolt wasn't added during filming. He was part of the movie long before that. The sequel itself had already been announced on September 27, 2007, with a release date set for June 26, 2009. Just 2 weeks later, on October 10th, screenwriters Roberto Orci, Alex Kurtzman, and franchise newcomer Aaron Kruger were officially signed on to write the script. But the clock was already ticking. The Writers Guild of America strike was set to begin on November 5th, giving the team less than a month to lay out the groundwork for a massive summer blockbuster. There simply wasn't enough time to write a full screenplay. However, what they managed to turn in was a rough 13-page outline. It was just enough to let Michael Bay begin pre-production while the writers were forced to walk away. Despite the production team not having a full script to work from, they pushed ahead anyway with the outline they had, beginning early prep, working with Hasbro, and taking meetings with one of their biggest collaborators, General Motors. GM had been a key partner on the first film, not just by supplying the alternate modes for all the Autobots except Optimus Prime, but also by providing dozens of background vehicles to fill out cityscapes, some of which were included specifically so Michael Bay could blow them up. That collaboration paid off in a big way, when the 2007 Transformers movie turned the fifth-generation Camaro into a cultural phenomenon thanks to the one and only Bumblebee. And General Motors was eager to strike gold once again. But this time, it wasn't just about screen time, it was about strategic marketing. GM came into the sequel with a lineup of futuristic concept cars designed not just for visual flair, but to promote upcoming real-world models. The Chevy Trax and Chevy Beat concepts were reimagined as the Autobot twins Skids and Mudflap, and would go on to inspire the real-world Chevy Spark and Chevy Trax SUV in the years following the film. The Corvette Stingray concept, meanwhile, became the foundation for Sideswipe, offering fans a sleek preview of GM's future design direction for the iconic American sports car. But of all the vehicles GM pitched, none carried more weight than the Chevy Volt. First unveiled in 2007, the Volt was the centerpiece of GM's push into green technology, a plug-in hybrid that promised cutting-edge fuel efficiency at a time when the auto industry was being forced to change. For GM, getting the Volt into Transformers Revenge of the Fallen wasn't just good exposure, it was a calculated marketing play, meant to position the Volt as the car of the future, framed through the lens of heroism and action. And it worked! During that final writing sprint before the strike, the Volt immediately stood out to the writing team, not just as a corporate tie-in, but as something genuinely distinctive. According to Roberto Orci, they had always intended to include the car from the moment they saw its design, recognizing it as unique and unlike anything else in the current Autobot lineup. And with the clock running out, they worked quickly to slot the Volt into the story as an Autobot named Jolt, during what Orci would call a mad dash to get the shooting draft in place before the strike brought everything to a halt. But slotting Jolt into the story was only half the battle. Their next challenge was winning over Michael Bay. You see, Bay had the final say on what cars made it into the movie, and the Volt, with its quiet electric engine and hybrid credentials, didn't exactly scream Bayhem. It wasn't loud, it wasn't fast, and it wasn't blowing anything up. So the writers had to convince Bay that Jolt could fit organically into the team and be just as cool as the others. GM wanted it in, the writers wanted it in, and eventually Bay signed off. Thus, Jolt was officially in Revenge of the Fallen. With that decision made, the next step was bringing Jolt to life visually, while the writers were sidelined by the strike. Concept artists began sketching out ideas for how a robot based on the 2007 Chevy Volt concept might look. Early designs emphasized a bulky, high-tech silhouette, with details pulled directly from the Volt's futuristic design. These initial sketches also hinted at the direction of his weaponry, featuring electric-themed pulse generators that leaned into the Volt's identity as a plug-in hybrid. Over time, that idea evolved into Jolt's signature energy whips, giving Jolt a unique combat identity that visually reinforced his electric origins. Although we don't know when exactly these designs were drafted up, at least one design gives us a concrete reference point. A concept labeled Rough Form Study A, which is dated January 7th, 2008. This sketch shows an early iteration of Jolt, still raw but already bearing some of the key hallmarks that would eventually carry on to his CGI model, specifically his dual energy whips. However, the next known piece of concept art, created sometime before January 29th, 2008, marked a major step towards Jolt's final form. His design was refined, his silhouette streamlined, and most notably, the alt mode was no longer based on the original 2007 Volt concept. Instead, it reflected GM's production intent Volt, a styling mock-up that represented the real-world model set to launch in 2010. Now, this concept would continue to evolve, leading to his final known concept, a bold iteration painted in electric blue. It was a color choice that made Jolt stand out among the other Autobots. Alongside the new paint job, artists refined his proportions, most notably scaling up his head to better match the bulk of his armored body. And what we see here is essentially what appeared in the final film. The only major distinctive change was his head. In the concept art, Jolt's head design was sharper, narrower, and featured a tall central crest. But by the time he made it to the screen, that silhouette had been reworked. The final CGI model gave Jolt a broader, more balanced helmet shape. That removed all the antennas and increased his facial detail and bulk, which helped anchor his design visually. And so, with Jolt's robot form finalized, the next step was translating his alt mode into something that could appear on camera. But there was just one problem. The production intent Chevy Volt only existed in a handful of design renderings. There was no functioning vehicle, no powertrain, no interior, and certainly nothing road-ready. So the production team had to build one from scratch. Working closely with GM, they constructed a full-size fiberglass replica of the Volt Jolt was based on. Although it looked convincing from a distance, this movie car wasn't a true electric vehicle. Underneath the sleek exterior was a Chevy Malibu chassis, complete with a standard gas-powered drivetrain and interior. In other words, it was a concept Volt on the outside, but a Malibu underneath. And funnily enough, to match the concept, it even had oversized brake discs that were made out of cardboard. Now, considering all the work that went into developing Jolt, from his concepts to the custom-built Volt replica, you'd expect him to get a proper introduction in the story, a big reveal just like the rest of the brand new Autobots. But instead, he's completely absent from the first act of the movie, and then without warning, he suddenly appears driving alongside the team on the bridge, as if he's been there the whole time. It's a strange omission, especially for a character the writers had gone out of their way to include. If Jolt was meant to be a part of the story from the beginning, then why does the film treat him like an afterthought? Why is he missing from the opening scene? And why doesn't he get a proper introduction? From the outside, it almost feels like something went wrong. And that sense of confusion wasn't limited to just the audience. Even Takara Tomy, the team behind the Transformers toys, was caught off guard. During production, they were informed that Jolt had been dropped from the movie, and they halted development on his figure entirely. It wasn't until they saw leaked set photos of the Volt on location that they realized he was still in the film, and had to scramble to get his toy back into the lineup. So what happened? Was it just a case of miscommunication? Well, unfortunately, we may never know for sure. But what we do know is that Jolt's first appearance in the film, the moment he joins the Autobots on the bridge, wasn't originally meant to be so abrupt. In fact, it appears that the scene was actually designed to be his formal introduction. I know, it sounds crazy, but hear me out. You see, on August 28, 2008, the production crew was filming in Long Beach, California, a location that stood in for not just one, but two places in the film's narrative. Parts of the city were dressed up with Chinese signage to represent Shanghai, where the opening battle with Demolisher takes place, but the same city streets and bridges also doubled as locations in the United States, including the exact same bridge where Jolt would later make his first appearance. And here's where things start to get really interesting. On YouTube, there's a fan video titled Transformers 2 Filming in Long Beach, California, Clip 1 of 3. uploaded by user FMD805. In it, we see Optimus Prime, Ironhide, Bumblebee, Sideswipe, Skids, and Mudflap driving in a tight convoy formation, the exact same formation that we see during the bridge scene. And if you look closely in the background, we can see these lampposts that match the ones that we see in the film. But here's the kicker. Another piece of fan shot footage, which is now unfortunately lost to time, was also reportedly filmed in Long Beach. Although the video itself has since been made private, Movie Chronicles, a now defunct Transformers fan site that documented Revenge of the Fallen's production, described the footage for fans in detail, and what they reported blows the lid off the mystery. Quoting directly, the last one is a low-quality phone video of the bots being overtaken by a honking Chevy Volt. Now, let that sink in for a moment. A honking Chevy Volt overtaking the rest of the Autobots? That's certainly something that we didn't see in the film. Or did we? Because here's where things start to click. In a promotional campaign released by Chevrolet to showcase their vehicles featured in Revenge of the Fallen, we get a glimpse of alternate takes and behind-the-scenes shots from the same bridge scene. And in those unused clips is something crucial. Jolt driving at the very back of the formation, trailing behind Optimus and Ironhide. Which means Jolt didn't just randomly appear in the convoy, he actively pulls in from behind, just like what was described in the Lost fan video. However, this raises a new question. Why the hell didn't we see this in the final cut? It's such a glaring omission. The footage was clearly shot, the setup was there, the context was there, and yet when you watch the movie, all of that is gone. Instead, Jolt simply materializes at the front of the group. It's edited in a way that makes his presence feel jarring, like a continuity error or a last-minute addition. But we know that wasn't the case. These unused clips prove that Jolt's introduction was intentional, a moment designed to show him catching up, overtaking the others, and officially joining the team. Maybe it was cut for pacing, maybe it was an editorial oversight. Maybe the visual payoff just wasn't strong enough to justify the runtime. Unfortunately, we may never know for sure. But what we do know is this. There was a plan, a proper introduction for Jolt, and it almost made it into the movie. But even with his botched introduction, Revenge of the Fallen still gave Jolt a defining moment. One that made it seem like the character had been designed for this exact moment from the very beginning. Because when the fate of the world hangs in the balance, when Prime is down, the Harvester is seconds from firing, and humanity is on the brink, it's Jolt who steps in. Out of nowhere, he unleashes his electric whips and fuses Jetfire's parts onto Optimus, upgrading him into the ultimate warrior. In the eyes of the audience, this was his purpose, his moment, the reason he was here at all. But here's the twist. It wasn't supposed to be him. Jolt wasn't even supposed to be in the scene originally. You see, thanks to early animatics, we know that the role of fusing Jetfire to Optimus was never meant for Jolt. It was written for Ratchet, the Autobots' chief medical officer. In fact, this was supposed to be his big moment, but it never made it into the final cut. Why? Well, the answer, as always, comes down to time and budget. In the director's commentary for the film, Michael Bay admitted that the third act was where the film started to fall apart behind the scenes. They were running out of time, out of money, and under intense pressure to deliver a finished film. Ratchet's planned involvement, where we would have seen him operating on Optimus, was likely just too complex and time-consuming to pull off in the window they had left. With the clock ticking and resources stretched thin, the team had to simplify. And according to Rick Alvarez, the former intellectual property manager for Transformers, that's exactly what happened. When asked about Jolt's sudden role in fusing Jetfire's parts to Optimus, Alvarez explained that the scene came about because, quote, "There's a really cool car called Volt coming out. Let's give this guy something to do in the two scenes that he's in." It's a brutally honest explanation, and one that perfectly sums up Jolt's bizarre legacy. A character born from a marketing strategy, shoehorned into a film mid-chaos, and ultimately assigned one of the most important tasks in the entire plot. Not because the story demanded it, but because there was a product to get out. And yet, despite the messiness of it all, despite the missing scenes, the jumbled editing, and the behind-the-scenes confusion, Jolt still managed to leave an impression on fans. Not because of screen time, not because of his non-existent dialogue, but because he was there at a critical turning point. He gave Optimus the power-up that saved the day. Now, this video is titled The Autobot With No Origin, and by now I think I've made it pretty clear why. But just for fun, let's take a step back from the chaos behind the scenes, and dive into the movie's world. If we had to come up with an in-universe explanation, where was Jolt before he magically appeared on that bridge? But before we get into all of that, I actually want to give a quick shout out to my mom. You see, if you guys been watching this channel for some time, you probably recall in 2024 when I was gone for 3 months out of the year with no explanation whatsoever. And the reason for that is because I ended up in the ICU, which is the intensive care unit, and that is the last place anyone wants to be. And the reason for that is because I developed ARDS, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome. And what that medical condition basically is where your lungs give out on you. Your lungs are like soft tissue, which allows it to expand and get air. Well, my lungs were starting to harden. And as you can imagine, that's life-threatening and very dangerous. So I had to be put on ECMO. I was also on a ventilator, had to get a trach, which is why I have this indent in my neck that you guys have probably seen when I'm on camera. And, it was not a fun time because I couldn't talk for months. So kind of like Bumblebee, I was mute. I had to learn to walk again because I was in bed rest for so long, so I couldn't walk. So I was on a cane for some time, like Jetfire. And, it was a really hard time. So in response to that, my mom decided to write a book about that whole experience. And the book is called Surviving the ICU. And it's basically my story in the hospital. And basically the story is written from her perspective as a parent, because the last thing you want as a parent is having a child in the ICU. It's absolutely horrific. And so it basically goes into that and what you have to learn about, because, you think doctors would always have stuff like this covered, but that's not always the case. So she really had to advocate and fight for me to make sure I was getting the best care possible. So yeah, this is basically my story from her perspective and what she had to do to basically help me stay alive. And I'm really grateful for that. So this is like a paperback version of the book, and we have an ebook as well on Amazon, and we're coming out for hardcover pretty soon. So if you want to help support the channel, support me, and support my family, if you have the time, definitely check out the book. And if it's your cup of tea, feel free to check out a copy. It would really mean a lot. So yeah, thanks for listening, and let's get right back into Jolt. So, where was Jolt? If we pretend for a moment that Revenge of the Fallen wasn't shaped by rushed production schedules and behind-the-scenes chaos, if we try to make sense of his appearance within the universe of the film itself, how do we explain it? Because let's be honest, the Autobots don't seem even remotely surprised when he shows up. There's no "who's that" or "glad you can make it." He just joins the convoy like he's been part of the team the entire time. So that opens up the door for a little theory crafting. One of the most common fan theories that I see is that Jolt was a part of Nest all along. He was just operating elsewhere, maybe on recon, maybe escorting a squad of soldiers, maybe off-screen saving a different part of the world. It's a clean, convenient idea, but unfortunately, the movie itself actually disproves it. Here's why. When the Autobots are driving on the bridge, the film intercuts to a tactical scene at Nest headquarters. The Autobots have just sent out an SOS warning of incoming Decepticon activity across the eastern United States. And during that scene, we get a visual readout. 2 sets of digital markers showing the number of hostile and friendly signals. There are 5 markers representing the Decepticons. These line up with the 5 cons that jumped out of the Bayos Freightliner to revive Megatron, those being Ravage, Scrap Metal, Rampage, Mixmaster, and Longhaul. On the screen, we also see 6 markers representing the Autobots. But here's the issue. There aren't 6 Autobots on the bridge, there are 7. Optimus Prime, Ironhide, Bumblebee, Sideswipe, Skids, Mudflap, and Jolt. Yet only 6 signals show up on the screen. Now, to be fair, the markers are spaced out across the East Coast, even though we know the Autobots are traveling together. That's likely just a visual decision to make it easier for audiences to register who's where without all the signals overlapping. But even with that creative liberty, the count still comes up short. And that tells us something important. While Nest may have known that the Autobots were in the field, Jolt himself clearly hadn't been officially logged into their system yet. Which brings us to the real question. Why wasn't he in their system yet? And when exactly did he arrive on Earth? Well, here's something worth considering. The movie never tells us why the Autobots are out on the East Coast in the first place, without Nest escorts, no tactical support, nothing. Up until now, every major encounter with the Decepticons has been a joint operation between the Autobots and Nest. So why now, during the height of a global Decepticon offensive, are 6 Autobots driving solo on a random bridge in the eastern United States? That detail alone suggests something important. They weren't deployed for battle, they were out there for a different reason. And that's where my theory comes in. What if their mission that day was a pickup? You see, I believe Jolt arrived on Earth sometime during the events of Revenge of the Fallen, responding to the Autobot signal Optimus broadcasted at the end of the first movie. But instead of landing near Nest or at an established military base, he touched down somewhere remote, somewhere in the eastern United States, isolated and out of range. So he did what any Autobot would do in that situation. He sent out a distress message, and that message reached 2 different ears. The Autobots got it first. Optimus Prime put together a small recovery squad, consisting up of Ironhide, Bumblebee, Sideswipe, Skids, and Mudflap, to rendezvous with this unknown Autobot signal. That's why they're out there, and this explains why Ratchet, RC, Elita 1, and Chromia aren't with them. Since it was a rescue mission and not a combat deployment, they did not need all hands on deck. But here's the twist. What if the Decepticons picked up that message too? Suddenly, everything starts to make sense. The film never explains why the Constructicons and Ravage were heading for the East Coast. There's no clear objective since Megatron, Starscream, Grindor, and Alice were already handling the mission to capture Sam. But a newly arrived Autobot? That was the kind of target they want to eliminate before he could join the fight. Which brings us to the bridge scene. As the Autobots drive to reach Jolt, they detect Decepticon activity in the region. That's when they send the SOS back to Nest, alerting them to the incoming threat, just as Jolt pulls into formation. This also explains why, when the Autobots regroup with Nest at the military base in New Jersey with a brand new teammate, no one bats an eye, because Nest already knew that the Autobots were on a recovery mission. They didn't know what Jolt looked like, but they knew someone was out there, someone important enough for Prime to personally lead a retrieval squad. So when Jolt rolled in alongside them, there was no need for introductions. As far as Nest was concerned, he was part of the team now. And from that point forward, we see Jolt fighting alongside the Autobots and their human allies. However, now I want to address one of Jolt's disappearances that a lot of fans cite as a continuity error. That of course being his absence at the end of the forest battle, when the rest of the Autobots regroup after Optimus's death. But this actually isn't a continuity error at all. You see, earlier in the film, during the same scene where Jolt first joins the convoy, we hear from Nest Command that the Autobots are splitting into two teams, and heading to both New York and Philadelphia. Sure enough, we later see Optimus Prime and Bumblebee arrive at the Delaware power plant to rescue Sam, which is located in Philadelphia. This means that the rest of the Autobots, Ironhide, Sideswipe, Skids, Mudflap, and Jolt, had to be on their way to New York to investigate Decepticon activity there. But as we know, during the power plant battle, Bumblebee manages to evacuate Michaela and Leo, but gets separated from Optimus and Sam, who end up being ambushed in the forest. After the brutal fight with Megatron, Starscream, and Grindor, the Autobots regroup at the site of Optimus's death. Ironhide, Bumblebee, Sideswipe, Skids, and Mudflap all arrive. Notably, Jolt is absent. But there's a surprise addition: Ratchet. Now, some fans see this as a mistake, but there's actually a logical explanation here. It's entirely possible that when Bumblebee split off to protect Michaela and Leo, he sent out a distress signal, alerting the rest of the team that Optimus was in danger. That signal would have caused Ironhide's unit to abandon their mission in New York and double back towards Philadelphia. And this would explain why Bumblebee is seen leading the convoy into the forest clearing. As for Ratchet, earlier in the film we saw he was stationed at Nest headquarters in Diego Garcia, along with the triplets. But when the Autobots sent their initial SOS from the bridge, Nest mobilized their forces, deploying both Ratchet and the triplets to support the operation. It wasn't until after Bumblebee's emergency message from the forest that Ratchet would have been redirected to assist Optimus, while RC, Elita 1, and Chromia continued with the original mission in New York. Which brings us back to Jolt. His absence here makes perfect sense if he was still en route to New York. After all, someone had to follow through on that mission, and as a new arrival, it makes sense he wouldn't be sent alone. Backed up by the triplets, he would have had enough firepower to investigate whatever Decepticon threat prompted the two-team split in the first place. And that's why neither Jolt or the triplets are present during the aftermath of the forest battle. Now, later in the film we see Jolt again, this time arriving at the military base in New Jersey. However, missing from this lineup are Bumblebee and the twins, who had taken Sam, Michaela, and Leo to a remote location in New York to help keep them hidden from the cons. Now, some might wonder why Jolt left New York after being sent there in the first place, but it actually makes a lot of sense. After the failed ambush at the power plant and Optimus's death, the entire mission shifted. And for Jolt, a newcomer to Earth and still unregistered in Nest's system, this was the perfect moment to fall back, regroup, and officially integrate with the rest of the team. As for the triplets, their absence here makes just as much sense. Since they had already been deployed to New York, it's likely they remained behind to assist Bumblebee, providing reconnaissance and support while he safeguarded Sam and the others. And so, with that said, this explains why neither the triplets nor Jolt were seen during the aftermath of the forest battle, and why they're scattered across different locations in the second half of the film. But this is where Jolt's story starts to fade. While he does appear briefly throughout the rest of the movie, and plays a crucial role during the climax by fusing Jetfire's parts onto Optimus, Revenge of the Fallen ends up being both his debut and his final appearance. He's never seen again in the sequels, and his fate remains completely unresolved on screen. Now, behind the scenes, we actually got our answer as to why he did not appear in Dark of the Moon pretty early on during the film's production. You see, on August 2nd, 2010, Nelson Lauren, the webmaster of Michael Bay's official website shoot for the edit, stated on the TFW 2005 forums that there would be no Jolt in Dark of the Moon. An official explanation as to why they decided to drop Jolt from the cast has never been stated, but IDW's Rising Storm comic, which was released as the official prequel to Dark of the Moon, offered one. In that story, Jolt had been stationed at NES headquarters in Diego Garcia, tasked with watching over several Autobot refugees, as well as guarding a captured Decepticon named Fearswoop. Optimus had ordered him to stay behind alongside Knockout and Dune Runner, despite Jolt's desire to join Bumblebee and help protect Sam Witwicky. But that decision would prove fatal. Shockwave launched a surprise attack on the base. Knockout was killed instantly and Jolt tried to fight back. Electrified whips ready, but was gunned down before he could even finish his distress call. Now, yes, Rising Storm, like many of the Bayverse comics, was later overridden by the events of Age of Extinction and The Last Night, so it's technically non-canon, but a lot of its events still line up, and this is one of them, especially when you consider the unspoken rivalry between Optimus Prime and Shockwave in Dark of the Moon. The film never explains it, but the tension is unmistakable, and when they finally face off, Optimus doesn't just kill Shockwave, he executes him, slowly, brutally, without hesitation. There's an emotional weight to this moment that the movie never acknowledges outright. But if you treat Rising Storm as canon, even loosely, it all starts to make sense. Shockwave wasn't just another Decepticon general. He was the butcher who massacred Nest agents, the assassin who killed Jolt, and in that light, Optimus's rage isn't just about the battle, it's personal. To me, that's the cleanest explanation for why Jolt was missing in Dark of the Moon. He was killed in the lead up to the film's events. Now, this brings us to one of the strangest details in all of this. In The Last Night, fans noticed something interesting in Cage's junkyard, a severed robot head with striking similarities to Jolt. And that got people theorizing. Did they just casually drop Jolt's head as an Easter egg? Well, if you compare it closely to Jolt's official CGI model, the details don't quite line up. And according to Sam Smith, the former Transformers design manager at Hasbro, who helped develop the Studio Series Jolt figure, chipped in on the discussion and commented that the head did not match Jolt's actual character model. So is it Jolt? Probably not, but if you want to believe it is, I won't stop you. The Bayverse practically runs on selective canon, but just know that officially there's no confirmation that Jolt's severed head is in Cage's junkyard. But either way, Jolt's story is one of the weirdest in the entire franchise. And all of this is the reason why he's my favorite character, because his entire existence is just so batshit insane. He wasn't supposed to be in the movie, then he was, then he wasn't, then suddenly he's duct taping jet engines to a truck god and saving the entire planet. He has no setup, no lines, less than a minute of screen time, and yet somehow he delivers the most consequential action in the entire film. Jolt is the perfect symbol of what Revenge of the Fallen really was. Rushed, chaotic, creatively compromised, but still wildly entertaining.